and welcome. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran and you're watching a special broadcast here on DD India. And I have with me a very special guest, the President of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, to talk about Brazil-India relations, regional and global issues of interest or concern to both Brasilia and New Delhi. Mr. President, thank you for making time to be on DD India. Appreciate it.
Very pleased to be here. I was invited to take part in this great National Republic Day in India. We have sustained very good relations with the local politicians and members of the business community. I'm sure that after signing 15 agreements, our trade relations will be further boosted. So yes, I am very happy with the Indian government and the Indian people.
Muito feliz com o governo indiano e com o seu povo.
Mr. President, I know this is your first visit to India, but you've already spent almost 3 days now in India. What are your first impressions about India, its people, its culture and society?
Olha, recepção.
We have been given a very warm and friendly reception in India. It even feels that by now I am already an Indian national, given the way I have been treated here in India. And this is the kind of memory I will certainly take back with me to Brazil. And quite certainly we will be able to do great businesses and of course draw closer and closer ties in the future.
Mr. President, your daughter is accompanying on your India visit. Is she enjoying her visit? And I believe she would join you to visit the Taj Mahal as well.
It is the first time they travel abroad. And of course, they are having a hard time with the time zone difference. But they're very happy, they're very pleased to stroll around the city, and they will certainly be with me at the Taj Mahal. And they too, I'm sure, will fall in love with that region and place.
Mr. President, you've met Prime Minister Narendra Modi a couple of times already. You met at the G20 summit in Japan last year and at the BRICS summit in Brasilia in November last year. Now, the two of you are seen as being dynamic leaders of two dynamic countries. You seem to share a similar worldview. You have a vision for your own countries. How would you describe your relationship with Prime Minister Modi? And did you have a chance to talk informally with him on this visit?
Tive assim, oportunidade de conversar informalmente.
Yes, I did have a chance to talk to him informally. We do have a great deal of shared interests and desires, such as, for example, joining the UN Security Council. Brazil and India account for 1.5 billion inhabitants, and we rank among the world's 10 largest economies. And our closer ties and relations will certainly ensure that the world will look at us in a different light.
Nós atingiremos o nosso objetivo para o bem dos nossos povos.
Mr. President, Brazil and India have signed 15 agreements in New Delhi that they cover the entire gamut of relations from trade and investment to defense and security, from energy and agriculture to people ties. Now, how would you describe the current ties between India and Brazil, and where do you want to see the ties in the next few years?
Nós temos muita coisa.
We have a great deal in common. And there are things that Brazil needs from India, and there are things that India needs from Brazil. So I think I can describe this marriage pretty much as a perfect marriage. In the next few years, we will certainly work to further boost our trade relations with India. And all of us, both India and Brazil, will ultimately benefit if we continue to work along those lines.
A continuarmos agindo dessa maneira.
Mr. President, it seems that India and Brazil talk about their relationship more in the multilateral context than bilateral. People talk about Brazil and India as members of BRICS, as members of IPSA, BASIC and G4. But surely there's more to Brazil-India ties than just BRICS. So does Brazil intend to ramp up the bilateral ties going forward? And what can one expect in the coming days in terms of implementing the strategic partnership action plan between Brazil and India?
Given the sheer number of agreements we have just signed, 15 altogether, I think it is fair to say that as far as I know, never before have so many agreements been signed, neither in Brazil nor in India. That in itself shows that our countries are in a position to meet each other's needs. And it is very much based on that principle that I am sure that we will be able to increasingly work together better and our trade flows will be further boosted.
And Mr. President, talking about these groups such as BRICS and IPSA, do you feel that there is a need to revive or revitalize IPSA, which involves India, Brazil, and South Africa? Also, is the G4 making real efforts for a permanent seat in the UN Security Council for Brazil and India?
I have given more attention to the second part of your question. In case we do get a seat at the UN Security Council, I believe that yes, Brazil and India will gain much greater visibility in the eyes of the world at large. After all, these are two emerging countries which, by further deepening and consolidating their relations, they can take a major step towards becoming high-profile players in the world's economy.
Mr. President, some say that people-to-people ties form the bedrock of any relationship. Now, there's a feeling in some circles in both Brazil and India that people should be made more aware about each other's language, culture, and traditions. In that context, how does Brazil intend to boost, say, tourism or student exchanges? Also, do you think Brazilian football and culture and Indian films, yoga, Ayurveda can bring the two countries together and their peoples especially?
A few years ago, we had this TV serial in Brazil called The Path to the Indies, so showcasing the Indian culture and people. I'm sure more will come, especially because the culture portfolio is in very good hands in Brazil.
Mr. President, you have served in the Brazilian army, and you know it better than anybody else that terrorism poses a serious threat to democracies everywhere, including Brazil and India. What is your government's view on terrorism, and how must democracies combat this challenge?
Those countries in the world that have provided shelter to terrorism have increasingly seen themselves in a state of isolation. In the Brazilian constitution itself, we do not admit terrorism, both within or outside of Brazil. When I took office, we did have a few terrorists operating in Brazil. Some of them have fled away, others we were able to capture and repatriate them back to their country. Well-known Italian terrorist Cesare Battisti was captured and sent back to Italy. Paraguayan and Chilean terrorists operating in Brazil were captured and repatriated back to their country of origin. And any terrorist that is captured in Brazil will certainly be sent back to their country of origin.
I want to talk a bit about other issues facing both Brazil and India. Now, climate change is a hotly debated topic around the world. Would you agree with those who say that climate change is a clear and present danger? Or do you think it is a hoax and that fears are exaggerated?
There is a measure of exaggeration, huge measure of exaggeration, yes. Brazil, for example, is the one country in the world that most preserves the environment. Now, quite a few countries in the world have a lot of interest in what lies below the topsoil in the Amazon region, the underground riches. So there's really a war going on because Brazil does, of course, compete vis-a-vis other countries on the commodities agenda, especially in the agribusiness sector. So they strongly criticized us, especially because in the past they were used to a country that would yield in to any pressure from abroad. Under my administration, that has changed, and some countries are uncomfortable with that. However, we will uphold our approach, we will preserve the environment continuously, but we will not forget that we must ensure that we be able to use our God-given resources in a commonsensical, rational manner.
Mr. President, like world leaders everywhere, you have your fair share of critics. You are outspoken, you articulate your opinions forcefully, and that is sometimes criticized by some people, including media. Do you think there are limits to liberalism and political correctness?
I will not sue anyone for what they say about or against me, and I have been accused of just about everything in Brazil. I was nevertheless elected spending less than half a million US dollars, less than half a million US dollars, and only 8 seconds of airtime on TV. And because, of course, my agenda was in line with society's yearnings, I was elected. And I was elected because of the population, not because of the media. And that's what really matters. Obviously enough, those who lost the chance to keep on using power, as was the case, of course, they're not comfortable. And much of the media, or many media circles and many political circles, seem to think and act along those lines. Not everyone, but some. We're doing our share. The numbers in the economy are outstanding. Brazil has regained its trust in the world.
No mundo todo.
Mr. President, you visited China last year. How do you see the situation obtaining in the Indo-Pacific region? And does Brazil want to look east to refocus its attention on Asia and the Indo-Pacific?
Durante a minha campanha,
During my election campaign, people said that I would shut Brazil's doors to China. Precisely the opposite is what has happened. We are doing business with the whole world. We no longer have any ideological approach to trade, as was the case in Brazil. Our approach is that of trade and liberalism. However, we do advocate a conservative agenda when it comes to customs or to values and principles. They also said that the Arab world would move away from Brazil. Much on the contrary, when I came to Saudi Arabia recently, we came out with $10 billion of investments in Brazil. We don't have any. We have our domestic problems from those groups who lost the election, and they're not at all comfortable with that.
Mr. President, the President of the US, Donald Trump, is eager for a peace plan between Israel and the Palestinians. He has spoken about a peace deal. Talking about Brazil-Israel ties, Mr. President, do you propose to move your country's embassy to Jerusalem? If so, when?
esse é compromisso.
This is a commitment I have. I have talked to Arab leaders about this issue or this question. I have talked to a few Arab leaders on the matter, and none of them has voiced any opposition. The Americans have moved their embassy to Jerusalem, no problem, and we intend to do the same without any major friction. And I think by next year we should be in a position to possibly transferring our embassy to Jerusalem.
Mr. President, the US, Russia, China, all are involved in Latin American affairs. How do you see their role in your neighborhood, and do you see some or all of them as part of the problem or solution?
Eu vejo que os americanos fazem parte
I
da...
see that the Americans are part of the solution. Under the past administrations, Brazil moved away from the United States. Under my administration, much on the contrary, we have drawn closer ties with the US, and we have not had any problem whatsoever with the Americans. In March or February, March, we will be going back to the US once again to meet with major corporate groups, and I enjoy a lot of friendship, great friendly, amicable ties with Donald Trump, and I also feel that he is very much willing to ensure that the north-south axis between Brazil and the US be further and further strengthened. After all, if we do have one problem in South America, for example, such as Venezuela, if we work well with the US, we can certainly prevent such problems from happening again, and even overcome and solve the Venezuelan problems.
A questão venezuelana.
Mr. President, Brazil and India both have interests in West Asia or Middle East, as some call it. The recent tensions between the US and Iran have fueled anxieties in some countries. Now, you have supported President Trump on Iran. At the same time, you have said that Brazil will maintain its trading ties with Iran. How do you intend to balance the two, so to speak?
Nós repudiamos o terrorismo.
We repudiate terrorism anywhere in the world. That was a message I conveyed following the episode involving the Iranian authority who lost his life. And by so doing, we showed clearly on what side we are. Of course, we do not want to engage in this fight. And of course, trade is very important for Brazil. Now, if need be, we know exactly what approach to adopt in the future.
Se necessário, saberemos perfeitamente qual linha devemos seguir no futuro.
And talking about Brazil's neighbors, Mr. President, how do you see the situation obtaining in Venezuela? And what would you say about reports in a section of the media that says Brazil may have been involved in some activities to destabilize the government there?
O nosso trabalho no momento
Our efforts at the moment are focused on welcoming, receiving the Venezuelan refugees who are fleeing Venezuela, thousands of, tens of thousands into Brazil. We're actually relocating them into different cities throughout Brazil. The problem in Venezuela, however, is more serious than one can imagine. There are certain countries that do have vested interests in Venezuela. You even have army generals who are drug traffickers working in the Venezuelan army. You have guerrilla groups, and you have tens of thousands of Cubans in Venezuela, as well as terrorist cells. So only with difficulty can the Venezuelan issue be properly solved. We hope it will be solved, but on our side, we will do everything to foster greater dialogue towards a solution.
Buscar essa solução.
And to come back to Brazil-India ties, Mr. President, now energy security and defense and security are two key pillars of this relationship. And Brazil is a leader in biofuels, in renewable energy. What kind of cooperation are we looking at in oil and gas and renewable energy, and also defense and security?
Nós temos
Brazil has the world's best and the lowest cost ethanol from sugarcane. It's widely available in India as well, as we know. We are ready to offer India technology to obtain high-quality ethanol like ours. It'll be good for India, especially because given the environmental concern, of course, we will be able to help fight air pollution or environmental pollution, which is the case here and was or used to be the case in the state of São Paulo. On the technology front, Brazil lags way behind as compared to other countries in the world, and India, by contrast, is way ahead vis-a-vis Brazil on the technology front. So if we can achieve good partnerships, of course, the partnerships will be most welcome. And that is also true for the defense arena. The defense industry and armed forces were very much sidelined and neglected in Brazil because of the former government's power agenda. And after I took office, that has changed. And we have been addressing the armed forces in a totally different way vis-a-vis the treatment they were getting in the past up until recently. So yes, we're keenly interested in deepening our relations regarding defense material.
On that note, Mr. President, thank you so much for making time to be with us on DD India. Appreciate it. And thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you.